I'm Jim Collison, live from the Gallup campus here in Omaha, Nebraska, and the office is in India. This is Gallup's Called to Coach, recorded on May 19th, 2014. Called to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches who share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you have questions, comments, or contributions during the show, we do have a live chat room available for you. It's right below the main video window there, just a chat room. If you don't see that, there's a tag right below that says Issues, and we got a couple different ways for you to interact with us. But we'd love to have you come in the chat room. If you have questions after the show, after the program, and you want to email those in, you can do that as well. coaching@gallup.com, and of course, don't forget to visit the Gallup Strengths Center. That's just Gallup-Strengthscenter.com for all your coaches, all your coaching resources and training needs. You can also catch the video on both streaming, downloadable audio for offline listening to past programs over at coaching.gallup.com. If you'd like to live tweet with us, it's another way for you to interact with the program. You can use hashtag CSFchat on Twitter, and we'd love to have you do that as well. Pooja Luthra, Pooja, pronounce your last name for me. I messed that up. Luthra, thank you. I knew I'd mess that up, but that's okay.
You're fine.
She is our host today. She works as an advanced consultant with Gallup there in Delhi, and it's great to see you. And welcome to the very first Call to Coach in India. Big news. Great to have you.
Thank you so much, Jim. It's great to be here. Hi, everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to Gallup India in the very first edition of Gallup Called to Coach, the Indian edition. For those of you that have logged on to the US editions or the Southeast Asians before, probably are aware of this. But for those that are logging in for the absolute first time, there's a little something about Gallup that I want to share with you before we start. So Don Clifton, who's pretty much the founder of the StrengthsFinder, he envisioned that what if 1 million people take the StrengthsFinder? Now, as we stand here today, more than 10 million people have already taken the StrengthsFinder, and what we now envision is for 1 billion people to take the StrengthsFinder. Yeah, that's a huge number. So given that, the leadership at Gallup is absolutely committed to empowering external coaches, such as a lot of you that are on the webcast today, to help us support the 1 billion people who would take the StrengthsFinder in the times to come. Of course, a formal way of doing that is by going through the Gallup Strength Certification programs. And as a more ongoing support, and also more as a way to really further the science that we're all so passionately a part of, we have the Call to Coach series right here, wherein we hope that we have coaches who would share with us best practices on how they have leveraged the tool of StrengthsFinder to be able to make an impact on the lives of the people that they coach. And one such person who's here with us today is Indu. Indu, a very, very warm welcome, and I can say on behalf of Gallup that we're absolutely delighted to have you here.
Thank you, Pooja. What a pleasure.
About Indu, I'll just take a minute, Indu, to introduce you to the group here. I had the privilege of getting to know Indu when she was doing her strength certification earlier this year in Mumbai. And she has a very, very rich experience of 38 years in the field of counseling and coaching. Now, of course, she was an early adapter to the idea of positive psychology, to the idea of strengths-based development, but that's not the only thing that makes her experience very unique. Indu has had the chance to coach leaders across the world on the science of positive psychology and strengths-based development. More importantly, she has been very active in the non-profit domain. She's been on the board of various companies, and there is a lot of work that she's doing in the area of behavioral science on pro bono basis as well, and that just tells me how passionate she is about the entire field that we are also a part of. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Indu. Indu, why don't you start by telling us a little about your top talent themes, and then tell us about this journey that you've taken up as a strengths coach.
Thanks, Pooja. That was absolutely overwhelming to hear, and what a pleasure to be here on this. I mean, there's been a time when 6 years ago I started just thinking about this whole strengths-based development work, read the book, the Clifton book, and did the test and used lots of the material in my own way. Because I think at the core, I always believe this, that positive psychology is what people gets people ahead in life. And coming from the background that I do, which is psychology and behavioral work, it's been a struggle. So 38 years ago in India, how things were so different. And if
Yeah.
you talk about some of these aspects, it was shooed away, or I mean, everybody wanted to pay more attention to what you're not good at and sharpen that rather than pay attention to what you're good at. Well, my top five themes are strategic, maximizer, ideation, woo, and adaptability. And I have to say that through the strengths test, I really realized how much I use it, and I've benefited the most. Not only coaching people, but even personally, I feel like I know exactly where to use it now. I know how to use it. I know how to get myself through some very challenging times, and I've enjoyed this journey. So, I mean, even though I got accredited only early this year, but actually my relationship with the whole process and the whole tool and the scientific background, I think that's what makes me feel so good about it, because I work with a lot of doctors across the world, and I know that for them, having absolute data and some kind of science behind it, me saying it is very different from using it, the materials that Gallup gives me. And so really I recommend it to everybody, and I love using it now. It's become like a play tool for me. I'm just enjoying it every minute. That's
Great.
where I
That's great.
am.
Yeah. That's great to hear. So tell us, I know you've been involved in a lot of, like I said, that your experience is very multifaceted, and you've been involved in coaching and counseling different areas in terms of, you just said doctors. I believe that's your work with the International Union for Tuberculosis and Lung Disease Prevention for that. And of course, you and I have spoken a lot of times about the coaching work that you're doing with leaders and you're doing with managers, etc. So do you want to share with the listeners maybe a recent success story of how you sort of had a coaching conversation with someone around their talent themes? And when I say success, it could be, just in terms of the person feeling an aha or to just realize what they're all about.
Yeah, let me tell you one. I was actually the whole of last year working. So even though I work with the nonprofit sector, and as I told you, I'm on a couple of boards,
Yeah.
advisory boards as well as trusts, but I
Mm,
also work with the for-profit sector. And I
mm,
had a large group of people that I was coaching last year with one specific organization. And there was a bunch of them who um, they are directors of the organization, and they constantly spoke about a certain figure in their immediate boss, talking about everybody wants to be like him. I mean, the two or three people from his team constantly saying that their ideal thing would be to learn what he does and do it well. And he was like a mystical figure. And then, strangely, I got a chance to meet him with his reportee, because I was doing a kind of three-way. And while talking to him, he seemed really very simple, understated. And when I told him, I said, there's a whole mystery around you. People seem to say that, they want to be like you. He said, why? Why would you like to be like me? He told his reportee. He said, I have a set of talents that I use, and you have some of the things you do I really can't do. So why would you want to be like me? You're very good the way you are. And what I did, I picked that up. And when I got credited this January, I actually offered to do the test with him. I called him up directly. I said, look, I've just got credited. I need to use a few people to get my own practice and to kind of work with this. And would you be interested? And he jumped at it. And actually, that was a complete revelation, because working with him, whatever he said, I do well. It was a challenge working with him, because honestly I had to first build trust. So that's one very big thing. You have to build a relationship with him to get him, because I just pulled him out of the kind of from a file of place which I really didn't know. He could have also said no to me.
mm,
And he was open to it. And to work with him, he kept saying that everything he does, he's actually a very well known financial kind of guru. He comes in the papers very often. He's kind of quoted. Everybody thinks his study and analysis of the markets is superb. So he's a successful man, and he's a kind of extremely talented. But while working with him, I mean, the challenge for me was he kept seeming to say, I don't know how I do this. Oh, I just do it. You know, just mining for his talent gave me the opportunity to work so hard on these strengths. And the aha moments we got when we could actually pull out that, I mean, his strengths were adaptability, strategic, activator, ideation, and context. And in each one of these areas, I could see as we kept talking, and my session went on with him, actually finished within 2 hours, but he said, no, let's talk about it further. And so we kept talking about it. And each one of them, as I went, deeper and deeper, you could see how he also got this, oh, yes, actually, I do use this. Actually, I do use that. And to that, I want to say that, when he did the test and we pulled down all the details that, all the reports that Gallup gives, one can think that, oh, I've got it all and I know it. But for me as a coach, the value I added to him, and which I believe, and he told me, was the insights I provided to each one of the areas that he uses so well. So in some way, he demystified himself, and he could see what he uses, and he can use it again and again in other spaces as well. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's one example I could give you.
That's a great example. And you talk about mining for stories and mining for examples, brings me to another question. And I don't know whether it's even pertinent, but because of your rich experience, it's probably worth asking. Is do you find a sort of a cultural nuance to this? When you talk about coaching within India, and you've done some exemplary work throughout the globe. So when you talk about particularly coaching within the Indian context, do you find that there is an element of that mining piece which does take a lot of hard work because of probably the way we are raised, and that sort of a thing?
Oh yes, oh yes. I have to say that coaching, and since I work internationally, I must have worked with at least 40 or 50 cultures. I was
Yeah.
also on staff with Habitat for Humanity, which is a U.S. organization, and I was their director, organization learning and knowledge. And I think that there's a huge difference from culturally from the way we are raised and from the way some of the Western first world countries are raised. So for me, the difference is over here, because we are a collective culture and they are an individual culture. Collective would be that we learn at a very young age not to speak of your achievements. We don't speak about it. We are supposed to be modest. We are supposed to be, adapt and adjust to situations. And sometimes it's looked at as very, you're bragging if you say you're good at something. And
Yeah.
to sit down with someone and coach him, a person who is very understated and who's not willing to speak up of what he does well, you really have to understand that cultural nuance and bring up uh, opportunities for him to talk of those talents and actually
Mm.
highlight it and bring it on the table and say, well, this is something you do well. Repeatedly, you've done well. I mean, this person actually told me there was a time in his life when he got married early, and when he would come home, his wife would look at his face and say, have you lost your job? Because he was so often in the wrong job. And there were so many times that he was just bored with what he was doing till he found this fit and somebody kind of pulled him into it. And now he's kind of in a very short span of time. So I would really attribute it to, because I mean, even working cross culturally, I see in a room full of people, certain cultures are able to articulate and assert and speak up. And some cultures find it difficult too. And as a coach, I think it's really important perspective to keep in mind as you're working with different people. Because I mean, I keep saying the globe is getting smaller. We are going across the globe to do work. I mean, India as a country is growing very rapidly, and I'm sure many people will come this side or we go the other way. And to keep this, because this is important. The test is one, but you using the test and applying it and getting people to see it might be some different kinds of challenging processes for a coach. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know you do a lot of work in both the interpersonal, intrapersonal space. And when you sort of go into organizations, or you go into, let's say, a nonprofit situation, wherever you're doing a coaching thing, have you had an opportunity to work with not just one person, but maybe a few individuals at the same time, maybe a coherent team, or maybe, I know you've mentioned a few examples in which you actually sort of married talent teams of two people working together, that sort of a thing.
Yes, actually, I'm on a retainer for a company which is a small company but extremely successful. And there are two founders in this company. They're women, and I came in and I did the strengths test with them right away. I've already been working with them for the last 1 or 2 years, but I never thought of using the strengths test. And I always hit a block with them, in a sense that they're both very different people. And just to, just to give you a perspective of who they are, that there's one person who has her top 5 talents as strategic ideation, activator, communication, and positivity. And the other one has achiever, adaptability, responsibility, restorative, and developer. And so when they try and do something together, they constantly get into a little bit of a tangle, But at the same time, because they're also great friends and they started this company and they're very successful. I mean, they were both nominated as the 23rd most powerful women in India by Fortune. So they're very successful. So some way they even find ways to kind of get over it and move on. But for me as a coach, I needed more than that. And I think the strengths test opened up a huge box of, opportunity. So the first thing I did was work with them, and then they kind of kept looking at each other's faces and said, oh, that's why this happened, or that's why this happened. And so they found out what they could bring as, great positiveness to the table, and what they could do, each one of them could do differently. And then I threw it up and said, let's work with your team. And they have 6 key people, so they're 6 plus 2. And I used the strength test on all the 6, and all the 6, I mean, the insights they got, and then they realized why they have different kinds of issues with each of these 2 leaders, and how they can kind of complement each other as a team and get together. And each one, because presently they are at the curve of wanting to grow and take a huge quantum leap. And not only in terms of money, they want to grow in terms of people, and they're ready. And unless they didn't discover some of this, they would have keep battering with each other or struggling and, getting knotted. They seem like, we can do it. We are all pieces of the pie, and, we can do it and we can move ahead. So there's a lot of work to do. I mean, we've only just started. And I think it's like there's a big light bulb moment, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, like we discussed, even when we're doing the strength certification, a lot of times when you're not following the strengths-based approach, the entire focus is on how to manage a weakness. So we have an issue, how do we manage around it so that we can sort of move on? When the idea of strength sort of kicks in, we start talking a different language about perfection, about maximizing things, about how to make it the best that there ever is. So from your experience around that, and I'm sure you probably have an example of something which is, more long-term, if you've seen that approach of weakness fixing sort of translate into excellence because of this insight that people have got on their talent themes and started using it more. So anything that's translated into performance that that you've seen and in front of you that comes to mind.
Well, I'll give you an example, Pooja, of a single person and then the organization who I've worked with for a long period of time. She's a medical doctor, and I'm using people who I have taken permission from yesterday to use their examples on this. So that's why I can freely say who I'm talking about. But this person, she's a medical doctor who retired from as the dean of one of our large public hospitals. She's very successful, and when she was retiring, there were lots of people who were willing to kind of put their money in and say, why don't you start an organization of your own, a nonprofit? And she took 6 of her closest friends who are also doctors onto the trust, and she started off wanting to work with women and children. And they are all neonatologists for newborn babies. And since the mortality rate of newborn babies is very high in India, she thought that she's going to work in that area, and she wants to save the lives of these babies and find ways to work with the government. And there was a bank actually put a huge amount of money onto just based on their trust with her. And she called me in as a consultant within hardly 6-8 months of her starting, because she realized that they are doctors. They really aren't able to set themselves up in terms of building an institution or governance and things like that. So I did various kinds of work right from scratch, building a vision, getting their mission, values, just very, very basic, building governance and board governance work. And one of the things that came up through this journey was that she had no succession plan. She didn't know, everything was built on, everybody was depending on her, and she was already over 62. So people are putting in a lot of money onto you, and she kept saying, I really don't know how to do this, I really don't know how. And what she didn't know was how to manage a business, because this was like a business. And she really, I don't know this, I don't know that. And I was like, okay, doctor, let's figure out what you know, what you do well, let's figure out what you can do well. And we realized that um, just based on what she can do well. The fact is that people trusted her. The fact is that she ran the old hospital, which is a large public hospital in India. And thousands of doctors and patients. She ran it as the dean. So we pulled out everything that she did well, and we set that up. It's taken, I think, about 8 years for that organization, and it's running and it gets money from across the world. But one of the good things is that she stepped down as the CEO. She stepped down, she allowed other people to come in, because she realized that what I do well, I should go out and raise resource. I should go out and do advocacy. I should go out, and I should not be sitting there and doing day-to-day management. That's not who I am, and that's not what I'm good at. And just last week, she's taken, I think on the 1st of May, she's taken over as the director of another large hospital. And the first thing she did within a week of coming is to call me up and say, come on in, let's do something together. And I'm really planning to use the strength test now on many people in that hospital, so that we get that going. And we kind of, and she says to me also, when you told me what I do well, I stepped out. And she's also been nominated, not nominated, she's actually given the Ashoka Award. And she now says, some of the things that you told me that I do well, that's what's taking me ahead, rather than struggling with what I did. I would have been a mess. So, these are really examples of where the strength test will just kind of fly. And I'm very, very excited about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let me ask you this. There's some great examples that you've given here, but in your own journey, I know you've been an early adapter of the idea of positive psychology. The StrengthsFinder, the test per se, probably came in a little bit later for you. But now that you are using, of course, the StrengthsFinder as well as I know you're using some of the other methodologies in your coaching interactions with your clients as well. How has this sort of helped you grow as a coach? How has it helped you learn a little bit more about your talents when it comes to doing these coaching interventions for your clients?
Well, I do see, because I've got this talent of, say, positivity, for example.
I can vouch for that one.
Yeah, yeah.
You're like the energy in the room. You walk into the room and it just lights up.
Yeah, but I see it sometimes, and that's the contrast, with positivity that I have, is I don't seem to see the other side. Ever since I've done the strength test, I'm aware of it very much. And so when somebody is talking, and somebody, say, deliberative, people who kind of want to go through everything, I'm in this, now come on, it'll happen. I hold myself back a bit. I'm willing to listen. So there have been contrasting times before, which sometimes has also got me into trouble. But now that I'm more aware of it, I can see very clearly that, where I am, how I think, which way ideation. I love just thinking up new ideas and doing new things. And so the risk is high in that. And very often for people who are not willing to take that kind of risk, people with focus, for example, or people with input, they want to see it differently. And I can allow that space now. I can enjoy the space. I can learn from it. I don't have to be, and I know those barriers that came up with people and me. Now I'm more aware of it. And so while coaching, I'm far more aware of what I bring, what I have an edge over, what is it that I can work with, and also allow my coachee or the person I'm working with to be who he is and use his talent, and we can still work together,
Yeah, that's great. So if you were to sort of, I'm sure the listeners out there who probably are already a part of the expanding network of external coaches that Gallup has, or they're intending to be. So if there is a tip or a technique that you'd sort of like to share with them, your secret mantra of 38 years that has allowed you to be so successful in what you do. Of course, I know one thing is the talent, which goes without saying. But apart from that, anything that you'd like to sort of share with the listeners today in terms of what they should do to be effective coaches in this area?
Well, I think they should prepare. I prepare very well before I actually sit with a client. I don't do a haphazard job. I prepare. So preparation, not to assume that you would know this person and you can just do the work.
Yeah.
So I prepare enough. Listening. I think listening is a very, very core skill you have to develop. And very often you assume and your mind is already telling you about certain kinds of themes and talents, and so you assume this person is going to be like that. So really listening to what the person is saying and taking down your notes or keeping that in perspective. Trust. I mean, building trust with the person you're working with is very important. And so with trust goes a lot of other aspects like, confidentiality, you know, just the way your ethics and values as a coach. Because in some way, coach or mentor is somebody he's looking up to or he relies on for certain things. And if you don't live it, it's not just saying you trust me. You have to live it by your actions, by your words, by the way you speak about the person. I think these are just behavioral aspects that people should build into them. Knowing the material is one big chunk, and then being who you are as a coach and having all the different behavioral kind of aspects of a good coach. I think both go hand in hand. So it's really important. It's a responsible job. You are in somebody's life because you're looking for them to grow, and you have to believe that. So inside of you have to believe that this is what I'm there for. Otherwise everybody's okay, they don't need you. So that's what I think a coach should bring on the table.
Absolutely. Great thoughts. Over to you, Jim. Do we have anyone asking any questions around this?
No, not yet. They're a little shy. This is the first program that we've done here specifically on India. They're a little shy. But Indu, I have a question for you, and you mentioned it early on, which is in a culture that struggles to promote itself, of course, strengths plays right into that, right? I mean, it is identifying those things that we're best at. What's some coaching advice that you might give to someone who's dealing with some individuals who don't necessarily want to claim those strengths or promote them themselves? How do you get them to come out of their shell a little bit? How do you get them to kind of, claim it and, name it, claim it, and then, of course, aim it?
Yeah, Jim, what I do is I do a lot of pre-work in building this little relationship to make them free to speak about situations very freely. And while they're speaking, I keep kind of asking questions like, what did you do in this? Or what is it that you've done? Did you do something differently? So for an example, this person that I referred to, and I told you from the finance group, when he said that, well, people just trust me with their money. And I said, yeah, do they just trust you with their money? Is there something that you've done that actually trusts? He said, I don't know. And he was actually giving an example of where a company was willing to give some $5 million to him to invest. And he said, no, I just want to take 3 million. Let me invest this and then I'll take the next round. And I said, listen, people are not going to give you $5 million unless there is something to it. What have you done? And he said, I don't know, maybe I have actually thought about ways that I would invest that 3 million. I said, no, not about the 3 million. What have you done before this? And then he started spewing things that he has done for a couple of years and where what he had kind of preempted has happened and the success that people have got through the money they've invested in him and his ability to actually track numbers and go into history. And this whole thing about context, he can bring things. Was one of his themes. He could bring things into perspective, into history, and he could relay data from in numbers for 3 and 5 years of certain organizations and companies and who leads it. And so when he started to spew all that information, I said, isn't this a talent you have? Because not everybody can go back into 3 years and 5 years of an organization when you work with 20, 30 different organizations or maybe more. And then he said, yeah, actually, that's something I'm really good at. So, that's one example of people being unable to actually capture what they do, to actually dig into it and keep asking, What is it you did? What is it you did? How did you do it differently? What is, so in the storytelling, you pick up some of the nuances and then bring it together and tie it in and say, look, you've been repeatedly doing this. So this is something that you're really talented in. And then put it into one of the themes and reread the theme. Because, I generally tell them to read the descriptor that Gallup gives and highlight what they do well. And so as they look at the descriptor, generally they will always say, oh, this is exactly me. But okay, can we highlight what is it? Everything can't be you. Some of it may not. No, okay, everything is not me. And then you highlight. And as you highlight and you bring it to story, I tie in some of what I pick up and to what he's highlighted. So I keep going back and forth in the whole thing.
Yeah, and Indu, I think that's perfect because that's the example that you said earlier about the value that a coach brings. It's exactly that you pick up a report and there you see these names right there. You see these talent themes popping up. You see these statements popping up. You help them connect with how they've played out practically in the past, and B, that's the same thing you use to help the person sort of create a brand for themselves. So for this person, now he probably is more aware of, this is my brand. This is the trust factor I bring into the equation, which may be absent in other cases. So that's my talent. So I think that's a great example.
And then, it is easy to take, you can take him to the next level then, because once he claims all of this, then you say, okay, now where can you use this?
Absolutely.
And then that becomes easier.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, sorry about that. Pooja, this question's for you. Someone asked, and they may be new to the program, what's the advantages to our certification process here for coaches as we talk about this?
Yeah, sure. So like I mentioned earlier, a formal route, our vision is to have 1 million coaches which are part of the extended network of Gallup, external to Gallup. For this, for the formal process of getting to be a part of the network is the Gallup Strengths Certification Program. And the advantages are really that it is a culmination of the best of our science in the area of strengths of the past 50 years. So all that we have learned, all that we have gathered over the past 50 years, it's a culmination of that, which we help disembark that information to people who want to be coaches in the area of strengths-based development. So you do get, once you go through the program, you do get certified to be a Gallup coach on completing a test and doing some sort of coaching calls as a post-course requirement. And once you're a part of, once you're a sort of accredited Gallup certified coach, the advantages are pretty much what you see right here. This is our way of ongoing support to our Gallup coaches to make sure that they have what they need to be able to coach on the basis of the StrengthsFinder. You have the name Gallup attached to whatever work you're doing in terms of, if you're an external consultant, if you're an individual business owner, or if you're working within an organization where the strengths revolution has hit and you would want people to be able to make sense of the report. So just quoting what Indu said in the beginning is one thing, having people have the report in front of them, and the other thing is to be able to take that to the next level of helping them claim that report and finally aim it. Of course, like I said, that Indu has been a part of the program as well. She is a certified strengths coach with Gallup. Indu, would you like to add anything to that in terms of the advantages that you have seen being part of the Gallup family now?
Yeah, Jim, definitely it's a huge advantage because now, number one, I think people look at you as somebody who has a whole science study behind you, and you're not just speaking out of your hat. Earlier, even if I was very credible, but it is my perception. Now there's a whole study behind it. Gallup is not a small organization, or it's not done just very, small numbers. So when you talk about 32 million people being tested and things like that, they feel like, oh, there is some surety to it. They have more confidence. Secondly, of course, to me, when I say that I'm a Gallup accredited coach, Gallup has a value and a name of its own, and it does add value to who I am, I think, because they know I've gone through the rigor, they know that I've gone through the practice, and that my ability may be much sharper. That's what I would think.
Yeah, great.
Okay, very good. Another Pooja out there, so you have a counterpart out in the chat room. Ask the question: are there any specific and simple methods that you would suggest for individuals to identify their basic strengths on a daily basis Indu, let's start with you. Basic strengths on a daily basis.
Okay. Yes, of course, the StrengthsFinder is the most credible method of doing that. But in the absence of a report, if you want to sort of get to discover what a person's talents or strengths are, there are so many clues to talent that we see. So, for example, if somebody does something absolutely naturally every time, which means that they do something and they're so good at it, and everybody wonders, how do you do that? So, for example, in the case of the finance guy that Indu mentioned, it was what we call glimpses of excellence, that whatever you do is absolutely great every time. So because of that, you sort of think that there is a talent component to it. There's a whole degree of timeliness. So, if you end up doing something and the time just seems to fly by, that's another clue to talent. Another clue to talent would be, how satisfied you are after having done it. So, there is a feeling of, I finished a task and thank God it's over. That's not talent. But yes, I finished something and I wish I can do it again because there was this feeling of satisfaction. That's another clue to talent. So there's a whole lot of science behind clues to talent, even in the absence of reports. And I'd be happy to talk to the person offline as well and sort of talk a little bit more on it.
Okay. Indu, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I could add a couple of more things. I think when you have talent, you repeatedly do, like Pooja said, you repeatedly do things well and you feel good about it. The other one way I think is to also ask people around you what you do well. Asking people for some kind of feedback, people you live with or people you work with, and say that, what do you see me doing well? And when it is validated from outside, somewhere you also feel good about it. And I think what Gallup does to the test is to validate some of what we are doing. But Gallup does it in a more scientific way, whereas when you ask people, it could be clouded by their perception of who you are, or how are you in the relationship, or if you're the boss or the subordinate. So you can't take all, but at least some things you can find out, and then you pick that up and say, let me do more of it.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. I am out of questions from the chat room. That's great. That's a great start. Folks from the chat room, you guys can always, and don't forget, as we're watching this too, you can watch us recorded. So if you joined us late and you missed part of this, it'll go in replay as soon as we're done. So you can go back and push play on it and see the whole thing in its entirety as soon as we're done. So Pooja, I will throw it back to you for a second. Any final questions here as we kind of come in for a landing?
I'll ask one more, and that's because we spoke about in your interaction with the people that you've coached so far. Anything that you'd like to share with the listeners around the business per se? So you're in the coaching business. I know you're an entrepreneur by yourself, and you're doing this by yourself. So anything around the coaching business when it comes to the strengths-based development that you see that the business has benefited from it, and therefore it's an advantage in that respect as well.
Yes, I think so, because in some way, I think that, for the last couple of years, 2-3 years in this whole recession, for example, many businesses were rocking as in not successful, but were in turbulent time, and people were wondering, many people were switching jobs, they were not feeling good about what they were doing, they were not receiving any success. And in helping them to kind of look at what they do well and do what you do well now at this time, rather than struggle with what you're not doing well, helped a lot, because in some way, first of all, it motivated people. When teams get motivated, they automatically perform better. They automatically do better. And just keep telling them that forget the markets are bad, business is not so good, you don't know. I mean, in India, a lot of it depends on government policies, which were changing a lot in the last 2-3 years. So many businesses, many groups that I was working with, people were not feeling good about who they are. They were feeling like they want to change the kind of work they do. And helping them to look at their strengths actually changed the environment, changed the way they came to office, the way they kind of interacted with each other. And in the process, actually, and I have data which says that actually it changed the business, the numbers, because suddenly the numbers started to improve because you had a happy set of people coming to work. You didn't have people who were looking at each other's faces every morning saying, oh man, what is the markets like, or what is. So in some way, I think when you have happy people, And people who play to their strengths, you automatically create a space and an environment that feels good, has a set of people that are motivated to work. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Indu. I think that's all about the questions that I have for you today. Jim, is there anything that you would like to ask?
Well, I would like to, as we wrap it up here, I'd like to remind folks that, remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we have. If this is, you may have stumbled across this video and you're like, what are these strengths that we're talking about? All that information out at the Gallup Strengths Center. That's just Gallup-Strengthscenter.com. You can send us your questions or comments if you'd like to do that, coaching@gallup.com. And, of course, we have all the recorded audio and video of this program as well as all the past ones that we've done. We have about 20 for you out there over at our coaching's blog. That's just coaching.gallup.com, and lots of resources for you. Again, for both of you, I want to say congratulations. We've made it through our first one. Specifically,
Thank you.
I want to say thanks to everyone who came out to join us. We had a really good group for the first go around, and we'll hope to continue the interaction. We'll be back again in June, so we've already got the June one slated, and we'd like to bring you back. I think we're looking at that the fourth Tuesday in June. But if you want to know when all our events are, and you can join them live, go to gallup.eventbrite.com. We have everything listed out there as well, and an opportunity to know what's going on. This will wrap it for the first Call to Coach there in India, and we'll say thanks again for listening. We'll be back next June. And with that, I'll say good night, good morning, or good afternoon, no matter what time zone you're in. Thanks for coming.